us get started. So today is deal structure day. Everybody's been waiting for all semester. So, okay. This topic is the one that to me kind of pulls a lot of things together and begins to help you to really begin to grasp kind of how someone with only experience and no money can potentially get involved in the real estate development industry, and how something like that can happen. It also sort of gets into the kind of things that you need to think about before you do get into some sort of a deal with someone. So what exactly do we mean by deal structure? Well, simply put, what you need to do whenever you start a project, or before you start the project actually, because you don't want to be dealing with this after you've started the project. For example, if you are partnering with someone, let's say you're the developer and then you've got an investor that's purely a money partner, and that is the typical relationship in many cases. But you have the developer that has the knowledge, that has the experience, that has the connections, all those sorts of things, and then in many cases they have a money partner who is in a lot of cases a silent partner, and for the most part just contributes the cash to fund the project, funding the equity in the project. And so you don't want to set up the rules of the game after the game has started, or after the game is almost done. You want to set the rules of the game, the deal structure, up front, so that everyone is on board with what you're going to be doing, okay? And so here's what it really boils down to. What are some of the things that you want to establish up front in this deal structure? You want to establish how much each person is going to put into the deal in terms of equity or cash up front. You want to establish not only how much they're going to put up, but when they're going to put it up. You want to establish how they're going to get paid. Are they going to be paid off of operating cash flows that the project generates over the life of the project? And how much are they going to get paid off of those operating cash flows? You also want to establish when you would anticipate selling the property. And then if the property is not going to be sold, then you're probably going to have to establish some sort of a future date of valuation or some sort of an independent third party to come in and value the property, so that then you can determine how much folks are going to be paid at the conclusion of the project, okay? And how those returns are going to be split, who's going to get paid first, who is going to be paid last, is it going to be split 50-50, is it going to be based on their original contributions, is it going to be based on something else, okay? Now, what I'm going to say about all of this, because people ask, well, is there one, simple way that we need to do this? No. It's all completely dependent upon your own sort of relationships with your deal partners. And specifically, there are maybe somewhat general guidelines, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those, but for the most part it's limited only by your creativity as to, because think about it like this, and these are the kinds of things you should be thinking about, is you start a project as a developer, how are you going to get paid? Okay, one way you might get paid is through some sort of a developer fee, okay, like a consultant, okay, so that as the project goes through certain stages, hits certain milestones, then you as the developer might take a draw or some sort of payment to yourself for those activities, okay? And that would be, once again, something you would predetermine at the beginning of the process. It's not something you're going to be, hopefully, you know, trying to negotiate while you're going through the deal itself. I mean, you may have to revisit some things, but for the most part, you want to kind of establish that up front and say, okay, look, I'm going to get 3%, 5%, whatever of the overall construction budget to pay me a salary, if you will, as a developer's fee. And after I hit certain milestones, that once I get my building permit, I get, you know, maybe a chunk of money. Once I start construction, I get a chunk of money. Once I'm halfway through construction, I get another chunk of money. Once I'm all the way through construction, I get another chunk of money. Once I get an occupancy permit, another chunk of money, you know, so forth, so on. I mean, you can work out those sort of details, obviously, as to what, you know, when those payments are going to occur, how much they're going to be, that sort of thing. But as a general rule, yeah, that is one approach for, you know, the developer to get paid, as a fee-based developer. But in addition to that, or in place of that, you could work out an arrangement of where you collect no money until the project is open for business, okay? And the first check that you might collect would be off of the operating cash flow that the project is going to be throwing off in terms of rental revenues. Well, that's a whole different sort of incentive structure, isn't it? I mean, what does that incentivize you to do? Get the project built really quickly and get it occupied really quickly and start collecting those cash flows. You know, as opposed to a developer sort of fee structure where you're being paid all through that sort of, now obviously a lot of developers can't inherently forego that fee structure because the construction process might be 6 months, a year, 18 months or longer. So, you know, there's usually going to need to be some sort of payment that occurs, you know, during that time, unless, once again, they're reasonably wealthy or they've got other projects that they, you know, are getting paid off of, you know, whatever it might be. But, you know, those are things to begin to kind of think about. Now, another little way of beginning to kind of formulate this in your mind is, if you're the developer, and let's say you put virtually no money into the deal, okay? You are strictly putting in your expertise, and you've got a money partner. Let's say that money partner is putting up all the equity capital, and you're, you know, obviously getting a bank loan on the project. Then you think about, well, what are your incentives as the developer, depending on, you know, when might you be paid? Because if you're not putting any money into the deal, your business partner might say, well, you don't deserve very much, if any, of the operating cash flow off of the deal. What you're going to potentially participate in as the developer is going to be on the back end of the deal whenever we sell the project, maybe, you know, 3 years or 5 years from now, okay? And at that point, then we're going to give you, you know, a full, complete, you know, payment for all of your services, and it's going to be, to a certain extent, contingent on the value that the property has been able to generate over that time period, okay? That you may have started out with a $1 million project that's now worth $2 million, and the developer would potentially receive a big incentive on that residual value as opposed to the actual operating cash flows. Does that make sense?
Or you can go the other way too.
It can go the other way. My point is, it can be done virtually any way that you can, you know, really imagine in terms of how you might choose to structure that deal. Now, one of the terms that gets thrown out every so often is pari passu. Have you ever heard that term? Pari passu. I'm going to write it down. Pari passu. You will hear this quite often whenever folks are talking about deal structure. Okay, look it up. Google it. Use your phone, use your laptop, just look it up. just so that you know that I'm not just giving you a bunch of mush, okay?
How do you spell it? Can you?
It's like
Oh, okay, you got it.
everybody gets.
What you put in, you get out,
Yeah.
is basically what it boils down to, okay? So in other words, it's meant to be proportional, is what pari passu means. That if you put in 10% of the equity, you then should get 10% of the reward, okay? If you put in 20% of the equity, you should get 20% of the reward, or the cash flow, or the rate of return. Does that make sense? In other words, it's kind of like what you put in, you get out, okay? On a proportional basis. Yep.
In the real world, like if you
That is the real world.
Okay, but I'm saying like if for you, that's the way you will do business as a developer, because you know, each one will have their own.
No,
Right.
you don't want that.
As a
You
developer,
want to promote where you get more.
no, I understand, but like, what will you use if you are a developer? How would you approach something that is good for you and you know will be
It
good?
totally depends on the situation. You know, it depends on how risky the project is, what kind of project it is, how big it is, how many different players you've got in it. That's what I'm saying. Everything depends as to how you might. Now, the simplest of all is the pari passu, which is simply what you put in, you get out, okay? In terms of percentage wise, okay? Now, what can also happen is that you get something called a preferred return. Or a pref, okay, as many times they'll just sort of refer to it. And the preferred return may mean that you're first in line to get paid, okay? And you may get a fixed rate of return, okay? So that, you know, if we've got a project and it's generating $100,000 of revenue that we're going to be able to share, if you will, then if your percentage is 10%, we may say you have a pref return of 10%, you're going to get 10% of that cash flow. So of that $100,000 of revenue, you're going to get paid first, 10% of that, or $10,000. Then whatever is left over, the $90,000 that's left over, would then be distributed in some way. Does that make sense?
That's a good way for the developer, though.
Yeah,
It's a
but
better way.
it's the whole thing that you may get the money that you have invested. See, in many cases, the way the deals are structured is you try to structure them maybe in a way where there's a return of capital. Keyword being of.
Can I say that the preferred return is the cost of your capital for keeping it in the project for the duration of the, no?
Potentially. I mean, that's one way it could be looked at, but it's not always going to be that way. Okay? So the return of capital versus return on capital, two different things. What is the return of capital? No, but well, what is it? Okay, if I give you $10,000 to invest, okay, all right, that $10,000 is my equity contribution, yes? Okay, when the deal starts making money, to get my return of capital, what we try to do is set up a structure where you pay me back first that $10,000 that I invested. That's the return of capital. I'm getting that original money back. Then we may structure it subsequent or after getting my return of capital. Then we do a return on capital, which is above and beyond, okay? Now some deals are not structured that way at all. They're strictly structured as a return on capital. most of the calculations that you have done in this program are almost exclusively based on return on capital, which is simply saying, I invest $10,000, what sort of rate of return do I receive on my capital each year, or each month, or each quarter, whatever it might be, Noah?
Well, I guess, in the structuring, do you find people want their equity back last so that the interest is compounding on
Once
interest?
again, everybody is different. Because you have some people, and one of the things that you can be consistently amazed by, or at least I am, is that there are some really high net worth individuals that are very simplistic in their approach to things like this. They simply say, I'm giving you $10,000, I want twice that amount over 5 years. And that's their only calculation, is just simply saying, I want to double my money over 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, I've given you upfront 10 grand. At the end of 5 years, you pay me back 20 grand. Now we can calculate what is the actual, rate of return on that. But that is just simply saying they want back their 10 grand plus another 10 grand over a fixed period of time, and it's as simple as that. Other firms, as we've talked about here, in many cases set up some sort of a predetermined return, which, saying that, okay, I want 20% a year, or I want 15% a year, or I want whatever that fixed hurdle rate is. Once again, all of that is up for discussion. All of that is up for debate as to, what those percentages are going to be and when they're going to be paid. My point is, with a deal structure like this, what you're doing is you're basically saying, what are the terms of that deal up front? How much is each person putting in? When are they getting paid back? How much are they being paid back? How is that being, calculated and distributed over the actual deal? Okay. Now, one of the things that Noah brought up is a developer's promote. Okay, another term. Look it up. Believe me. This is where typically, after you have paid your investor some sort of a fixed rate of return, some sort of, whether it's a preferred return or just a fixed rate of return, once you have paid them that return, then you may set up a structure to say, all right, Mr. Investor or Mrs. Investor, you've gotten your 10 or 20% rate of return. All of the remaining cash flow from the deal is now going to be split 50-50. So even though as the developer I had maybe put in little or no money up front, the investor is going to get their fixed rate of return, and then whatever's left over after they get their fixed rate of return, then I as the developer am going to be able to share in a much more significant piece of that. And the reason, if you want to sort of think of it, why is it called a developer's promote? There actually is a very logical reason.
Because they get more.
Well, they get more, but if you really want
After a
to,
certain
but if
mark.
you want to think of it in another way, it gives the developer an incentive to promote the project. Okay? In other words, that it's purposely set up in such a way to sort of say, okay, look, we want the project to be successful. The more successful it is, the more money we make as the developer. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Now, kind of beginning to sort of put this sort of stuff into practice in terms of the calculations and that sort of thing, what I've done is I've given you a fairly basic sort of deal structure here. Now, with this particular deal structure, you've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 input variables. Now, which one are the input variables? The ones that are shaded in gray. Okay, in other words, those are the ones that you've got to be given, if you will. Everything else is an output. All right, so let's just sort of start at the top with this deal structure and just kind of walk through it, and then we'll do the calculations. And your whole quiz is based off of this. Okay, all you got to do is basically replicate it with some different numbers. All right. Now, so the first piece, another screen here so we'll get some space. All right, so the first piece, we've got our, excuse me, we've got our purchase price, $1 million, and then we've got that we're going to sell it at the end of year 5 for $1.2 million. Okay, pretty straightforward numbers. All right, now let's just sort of start off. The purchase price, this is obviously what we're buying it for. That amount is going to be then split up into what? Debt and equity. Okay, so we're going to get to that here in just a second. But before we get to that, let's just talk about the $1.2 million. Now, the assumption that's made here is just simply, I said, project sale at the end of year 5 of $1.2 million. So we're simply saying at the end of year 5, this deal structure is being set up to where there is going to be a sale automatically occurring at the end of the 5th year, and we're making the assumption this is what it's going to sell for. Okay? Now, granted, if the number actually ends up being higher or lower, that's going to change the returns, but at least you're sort of establishing sort of a baseline. Okay? Because what's really going to matter is later on the whole thing of who gets paid, when they get paid. Okay? Now, another point to sort of make with this $1.2 million, as I had said a little bit earlier, it doesn't inherently have to actually have a sale take place at the end of 5 years. Like, for example, Noah and I do a deal together, okay? At the end of 5 years, instead of putting the property up for sale, we simply agree up front, either a sale is going to take place, or we have an independent third-party appraiser come in, value the deal at the end of that 5-year period, and then based upon that valuation, we can either buy each other out or do whatever we want to do to be able to close out the arrangement. Does that make sense? Okay? But that, once again, and I can't stress this enough, this is the sort of thing that you want to have done before you even start the project. Because once you started the project, once you're knee-deep into it, any of you that have ever worked with partners, ever, the number one thing that you argue over is money. Okay? Whether it's a personal partner or whether it's a business partner, it's usually about money. All right? And so the point is, if you can up front simply say, okay, here are the terms of the arrangement, here is who's going to get paid, when they're going to get paid, how much they're going to get paid, and be able to sort of get closure on that, that's exceedingly important. Because otherwise, you're going to end up with a mess on your hands potentially a few years into this, or even a few months into it in some cases. Okay. We won't belabor that too much, but I think it's really important to talk about that. Okay, so that's the purchase. That's the sale. The other variables that we've got that are kind of our input variables, we've got, in this case, a 60% loan-to-value ratio. I'm going to put the other ones in here too. The cost of debt, or interest rate, is 5%. And then our developer partner equity is 20%. Okay, and we'll get to the other ones down at the bottom of the page here in just a moment. Okay, so with our 60% loan-to-value ratio, what does that mean? How much are we borrowing? in dollars?
$600,000.
$600,000 is what we're borrowing. 60% of the purchase price. So basically what we're saying is 1 million times 60%, 600,000 is going to be our debt, okay? Everybody's clear on that, yes? Okay, now then, our equity would be what? 400,000. Now, obviously, in the way that you see I've sort of set this up, that's not an input, that's a given. And how did I get that? Well, if you start with 100% and you subtract out the 60% debt, what are you left with? 40%. Okay, so that's just automatically calculated there for you. So your your equity is 400,000. Now, but the interesting thing is right below the equity, we've got developer's equity, and then we've got the investor's equity. So the investor's equity, okay, there, that has to, those two in this particular deal structure have to total 100%, yes?
Yes.
So 20% of the equity is going to come from the developer, 80% of the equity is going to come from the investor. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, that is going to be split out from there. Okay? So in this case, let's do the calculation. 400,000 times 20%. That means the developer is putting in 80,000 equity. So developer's equity is 80,000. The investor's equity is going to be the remainder of 320,000. Okay, obviously for a total of 400,000 altogether. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay. Any questions up to this point? Okay. Now, all right. So we kind of move on down the page just ever so slightly, and we've got the project annual net operating income. Okay, so the project net operating income is $100,000 a year. Now that's something that, once again, you're going to have to be given, or you're going to have to calculate, you know, potentially if you're given some other information, but in the case of the quiz, which I know is what you're really concerned about, you will be given what is your net operating income, all right? Now, from your net operating income, you've got to calculate your annual debt service.
Is
Now,
that a loan, the interest loan?
yeah, that's, you were taking the words right out of my mouth before I said them. Okay, so with this particular deal, for simplicity, okay, we have chosen to make it an interest-only mortgage, okay, for simplicity. Because if we do it otherwise, then we've got to subtract out the interest and the principal, and I'm trying to make it where we can understand it, okay? So in this case, interest-only loan, and so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be calculating what is the interest expense on what? What dollar amount?
On the loan amount.
On the loan amount, 600,000. Okay, what is the interest rate on the loan?
5%.
Okay, so the calculation is going to be 600,000 times 5%, and that is going to give you what?
30,000.
Okay, everybody get that? You understand where that's coming from? Yes or no? Okay?
Per year, right?
Per year. Okay, so with that, subtracting out that, that gives us our before tax cash flow of 70,000. Okay? Now, for the purposes of this analysis, we are making the assumption that this is basically some sort of a joint venture or partnership kind of arrangement whereby we are going to be distributing before tax cash flows to our investors. Now, you're saying, wait a second, we've been doing all this after-tax cash flow stuff. Where does that come into play? Okay.
So your money.
I'm sorry?
I mean, that's not.
Yeah, well, okay. So if this were structured as a corporation, the corporation would pay income tax on whatever earnings. Then after they have paid whatever the income tax is on their earnings, then that would be distributed to their shareholders. Okay? In this particular case, we are looking at an entity that is simply generating a before tax cash flow. Once that money has been made by the entity, then that money is distributed to the developer and any sort of partners the developer may have. Then the liability of the income tax is on them, not on the entity that actually is owning and operating the real estate. Does that make sense? Okay, so that, for example, out of the $70,000, if I hand over, virtually all that money to Noah as, the business partner in this deal, and Noah chooses to not pay income tax on the deal, that's on him, not on the project. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, okay, so we've got this 70,000 that we have available for distribution to the two different partners in this deal. And so you see right below the 70,000, I have pari passu. Pari passu distribution of before tax cash flow. First one is to the developer partner, the other is to the investor partner. Okay? So let's take a look at those. So for the developer, they're supposedly going to be getting 14,000 as their distribution, and the investor is going to be getting 56,000. Now, before you do anything else, if you just do what? You add those two together, you're going to get the 70,000. So that should ring in your mind, okay, this is some sort of percentage. Okay? Well, before you do anything, you could just simply back into it. We don't have to do it this way, but I'm just showing you. If you take 14,000 divided by 70,000, you get 20%. And my assumption is, you get 20% for that, you're going to get 80% for the investor. Okay? Where do those percentages come from? From up here. Okay? So all you really had to do was simply take the 70,000 that you were getting here for your before tax cash flow and simply say 70,000 times 20% for the developer's piece of the equity, 80% for the investor's piece. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Any questions on that? Now, once again, that's a pari passu distribution. Meaning, what they put in was what they got out. Now, are we required to have a pari passu distribution? No, 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 no. We are not. Okay? In this particular example, we chose to do it that way. We could have very easily said, we're not going to do a pari passu distribution. We're going to split up totally differently than this. We're gonna split it up and we're gonna say, okay, of that operating cash flow each year, we're gonna give the developer 50%, we're gonna give the investor 50%. We could have done it that way. We chose not to in this particular example, but that's one way we could have set it up. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? And we're gonna be getting to that here in just a minute, but right now, everybody is cleared up to where we are. Okay. All right. Kind of continuing to work our way down here just a little bit. All right. The next piece, pari passu distribution of the sale proceeds. Okay. Pari passu distribution of the sale proceeds. Now, take a look at the numbers they've got there. For the developer on the sale, they've got 120,000. And they've got the developer, or sorry, the investor, at 480,000. Now, at first glance, you're like, wait a second, where are these numbers coming from? Well, let's add them up first. Let's see what we get. 600,000. Now, wait a second. Oh, I'm sorry? Okay, so in this particular case, we're basically looking at the equity piece of the deal, okay, only. All right, so in this case, looking at it strictly from the equity piece, this is the distribution that they would be receiving, okay? Does that make sense?
This is the 1.2 million minus
What up?
the
Yeah.
600,000.
Correct. Because in essence, I'm sorry? Yes.
Minus the debt.
Yep. So in other words, okay, the project is going to sell for 1.2 million, correct? Okay. How much is the loan on the project?
600.
So $600,000 debt, which would leave you with $600,000 in profit or proceeds, correct? This is the part where people, unfortunately with this example, I shouldn't have had them be the same number because it made it a little bit confusing. That's why I'm trying to highlight it now so you don't get confused. So that $600,000 profit is what that $600,000 is representing. But this is representing their proportional share of that profit based upon the 2080. Okay, does that make sense? Everybody follow that, yes or no? Okay, didn't try to make it tricky, but unfortunately, my mistake there was having those be equal because that does kind of confuse people at first. Okay? All right. Now, once we've got that, we are then able to construct the cash flows, which is what follows immediately thereafter. Okay, so let's take a look at setting those up. This should be the easiest piece of the whole thing.
Can we go back there real quick, because I'm looking at my notes now. So the distribution of the sales proceeds, 1.2 million is the sale.
Correct.
Minus the debt amount, which we got from
Yep,
the
up here.
60%.
Yep.
And then it's 600,000 profit, the
Yep.
profit that kicks back for the proceeds.
Correct. And all of this is on a before-tax basis. Okay, so we're not dealing with depreciation, we're not dealing with the interest charges, we're not dealing with any of that stuff. We're just simply looking at it as a before-tax arrangement. Okay, everybody cool with that? All right. Moving forward. Okay, so we look at these cash flows that we've got here. We've got year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, and we've got the developer, we've got the investor, and then we've got the total. Okay, the total column is just obviously the two added together. All right, So, in this particular case, let's start with the total.
Professor, I was not calculating the actual distribution for sale, or that was the previous part?
That was the previous part.
Okay.
We're
Now
gonna be
that
using
the
that
cash
here in
flow-
a minute. I mean, in other words, we've calculated now everything we need to do our cash flows. Okay? So now we're filling in our cash flows. All right? So with our cash flows, one way you may want to start this to potentially avoid mistakes is to look at it as the total. Okay? Start with the total and work our way back. All right? So with this case, our total would be how much total equity did we have in this deal?
20%
20% up.
Oh,
of what?
Yes. No. We had 40% equity.
is
I'm saying total, everybody.
Right.
We had 40% or 400,000 of the $1 million is the total equity. That's the developer and the investor combined is the 400,000. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, that's our equity contribution at time period 0. All right, now the split between the developer and the investor is now based on the developer putting in 20% of that. So 20% of 800,000, I'm sorry, 20% of 400,000 is 80,000. Okay. And then the investor is putting in the remainder, in other words, 80% of 400,000 or 320,000. Okay? Everybody cool with that? Now, obviously, to go back and check yourself, just to add those two together, you're going to get the total. Okay. Now, you're also told that each year, your before-tax cash flow that's going to be available for distribution is 70,000. So you're going to have 70,000, 70,000, excuse me, 70,000, 70,000, and in that 5th year, you're going to have the 70,000 plus the total, no, not the sale price, the profit or the reversion, okay? So in this case, 70,000 plus 600,000 or 670,000 total. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
So that's the reversion, you're saying, not profit?
Well, it's the reversion to you. Reversion is, in essence, is profit. It's what you're getting back. That's the whole definition of reversion. The reversion is just simply, it's reverting back to you. Okay? All right. Is everybody cool with that? Yes?
The 70 just given to us.
Well, yeah, the 70, well, no, it's given to you up here, remember? Your before-tax cash flow, $70,000 a year. Okay, that's your operating cash flow each year. Okay, now, then to do the split of the 70,000 each year, what are you going to do? Pari passu, and you're somebody going to say, all right, you as the developer have contributed 20%, so you get 20% of that 70,000. So 20% of 70,000 is 14,000. You're looking down at the very bottom. You're looking at the next question. Okay. Okay, so 14,000 all the way down for the developer's piece of the 70,000. Okay, the remaining 80% is 56,000 that would be given to the investor. Okay, everybody cool with that? Okay, now the final little piece of that is to get the reversion added in there for the developer and for the investor. All right? Well, they're going to be splitting that 600,000. Yes? Okay, so that means the developer, pari passu, is going to get 20% of,
It's 600.
670.
well, what we need to do is take the 600,000 times 20% is 120,000, correct? Then for the investor, 600,000 times 80% is 480,000. Okay, everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. Now, what we need to do is calculate our before-tax internal rate of return for each of these columns. Now, based upon what we have done in this class, we can do it one of two ways. One way is to put in the 80,000 as our present value, as a negative, put in the 14,000 as a positive payment, put in 120,000 as a positive future value, and put in 5 years as the term, solve for the interest rate, and you've got the answer. That's one way to do it. The second way of doing it would be to put in the 80,000 as a negative cash flow, then 14,000 cash flow, 14,000 cash flow, 14,000 cash flow, 14,000 cash flow, and then for the final year, you would actually have to do what? Add those two together, and you would get 134,000 as your final cash flow for year 5. Then solve for internal rate of return. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. Okay? Now, doing that, you probably ought to do that, just to make sure you test yourself, make sure that you're able to get these. But you should get the 23.74 all the way across. Now, the reason that we go through and we're doing this specifically this way, with this pari passu distribution, where everybody's contributing what they're contributing, and then they're getting back a percentage or proportionate to what they put in, well, what do you see? Everybody's getting the same return on the amount of money they've invested, which is that's the whole idea behind pari passu. Okay? That everybody's getting the same, they're putting in the same amount percentage-wise, and they're taking out the same thing percentage-wise. Okay? So when you hear, people talk about the deal structure and they're saying it's a pari passu distribution, that's what they're talking about. Everything's all equal or proportional. Okay? Okay, everybody comfortable with that? Yes or no?
Do you mind let's not the first way you get the IRR? It's the
Okay, you got one of two ways of doing it. The first way, you're going to do one payment per year, and then you would put in 80,000 as a negative present value, 14,000 as a positive payment, 120,000 as a positive future value, 5 years as your term, solve for the interest rate, and you should get the 23.74. The other way that you could do it, one payment per year, 80,000 plus minus cash flow, sub J, then the 14,000 as a cash flow. That cash flow occurs 4 times, so you can put in 4 shift in sub J, and then put in the final cash flow of the 134,000 cash flow, and then solve for internal rate of return, and you will also get the 23.74%. Okay, so either one of those ways you can do it. Okay, the reason why we were able to do it this first way is because all the cash flows are the same in terms of the payments are the same. If those payments have been different each year, you would have been forced to do the cash flows and then itemize out each cash flow individually, okay? All right, moving forward. Okay, so that gets us down toward the very bottom of the sheet. Okay, now we've got a preferred return stuck in here. So it is no longer pari passu, okay? We've got a preferred return. And that preferred return to the investor partner is 10%, meaning the investor partner gets 10% of all the cash flows right off the top, automatically. Does that make sense?
From the capital investment, right?
Or the capital investment, or their investment.
Well, that preferred is actually taken from the NOI, right?
Look, we're going to work through it, but yes.
Right. I mean, just,
It actually is taken from both the NOI as well as from the final distribution of the cash flows. In this particular instance, we can make it a whole bunch of other ways, and you're getting ahead of me, but that's what you're going to be doing for your little project in this class. Okay. All right. So in this case, the new pieces of information we've got a preferred return to the investor of 10%, and then we have a leftover distribution to investor of 60%, and excuse me, and then that means by default we have the leftover distribution to the developer of 40%, because obviously those two have got a total of 100%.
So the 10% is out of the.
It's paid first.
Yeah.
The 10% gets paid first off the top.
Got it.
Okay? Then whatever's left over gets distributed proportionally, in this case, and then there's no rhyme or reason to this. Okay, in other words, this is not pari passu. This is just simply saying that we're giving the investor
10% first.
straight off the bat.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's work through how this actually gets set up mechanically. All right. So once again, let's look at our cash flows here for a second. And this is where, okay, so we've got for year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here we've got the developer, we've got the investor, and we've got the total. Now, looking at this sheet, what doesn't change?
The equity.
Well, not so much, well, it's sort of kind of the equity, but what doesn't change here?
The structure.
What?
10%. Yeah.
You're not, I don't think, you're not picking up on one of the most important pieces of this.
cash flow.
The total column does not change. Look, from this example to this example, the total column does not change. The project is still yielding what the project is still yielding. How you are choosing to distribute the money from the project is what is changing. Okay? Is everybody kosher with that? Okay? So this is your starting point. Okay? So that you don't confuse yourself. So you go over and just write in those total numbers. You've already calculated them from above, so you're able just to write them down below. So we've got the negative 400,000, excuse me, 70,000, 70, 70, 70, and then the final one, we'll go ahead and just write it in as is. Well, we can do it either way, I don't care. We can do it as the 600,000 plus the 70,000, just to be consistent with what we did above. Okay, all right. Everybody good? Now, this is where the magic happens. Not if there's anything complicated about this, but this is where people are potentially going to get screwed up. All right. Now, the equity piece, as you'll notice, that line in year 0, no changes. Okay, they're still putting in the same amounts they put in before, yes?
Right.
They're still putting in, the developer's still putting in 80 grand. You can just bring that right down. The investor is still putting in 320 grand. Okay? So no changes on that. The changes, excuse me, the changes that are occurring is everything, obviously, from that point. Okay. The preferred return to the investor partner of 10%. Where do we get that number of 54,800? Okay, so before I give you the logic math to get that, see if you can get it on your own real quick. Give you 2 or 3 minutes to see if you can get it on your own. And to also get the 15,200 for the developer. It's a 2-step process. It's just logic, very simple logic. Okay, let me give you a little bit of a hint. It's not complicated, but it'll throw you at first. 10% of what?
Of the capital invested for the.
Well,
investment.
okay, before you do that, you gotta, it's 10% off of the top. Okay, what does that mean? 10% off the top means 10% of the total, correct? 10% of the total is what?
400?
It's 70.
No.
70.
Yeah,
70 for each year.
Yes.
So 10% times 70 is $7,000 to begin with. They get that automatically. So in other words, what we can do is we can sort of write in here, they're getting, the investor is getting 7,000
Yeah.
each year. Plus,
Plus the investor gets the 60% of
of
the remaining
what's
balance.
remaining, okay? Okay? Let's do the simple math here on the board so that you understand what we're doing.
None of these.
See, this is where once again, the light begins to go off, okay? You're taking the 70,000, you're subtracting out 7,000, which gives you what?
63.
63,000. Okay, now, that's what's left to be able, those are the leftovers, if you will. We've eaten $7,000 worth, we've got leftovers of 63,000 to eat or distribute.
Right.
Okay?
Then that's
So of
63.
that 63,000, what percentage does the investor get?
The investor
60%
gets
of that.
60% and the 40%.
So 63,000 times 0.6 okay? Okay, what are we still missing though?
10,000. The 7,000.
Now you have to add.
But we've got one other piece that we're missing though.
Yeah, because we're only at.
Yeah, no, do the math, because we're missing something else besides the 7,000. If you were to add in the 7,000 here, I'm trying to get you to see where you can make a mistake. 37,800 plus 7,000 gives you 44,800. We're missing something.
10,000?
Because we gotta revert back to the 80% that we put in. Somehow.
Okay. This is where I'm trying to trip you up a little bit. Okay. So what you've got to actually do is with this 63,000, what you really have to do is you're going to take that number,
Oh,
multiply it by
10%?
the 80%, which gives you 50,400. But then you're like, wait a second. That's not the number. So what are you going to do? I'm trying to give you all the ways not to work it so that you hopefully will lock in what you need to do.
Professor, I have a question.
Yep.
On the leftover distribution to the investors and the developer, 60/40,
Yep.
why is it different from the equity percentage distribution of 20 and 80?
Because that would have been pari passu. This is not pari passu.
Oh, this is beyond purpose.
What?
So where are we getting this magical 54,800?
So then multiply that by the 60. So if you do.
So think about it like this. Let's work it another way. Let's work backwards here for a second. Let's work backwards here for a second. 54,800, and let's take the 7,000 out of there. And we're working up. Okay? So 54,800 minus 7,000 would put us at 47,800. Okay? So now, where do we go from there?
Divide by 60 percent.
47,800 divided by no, that's not going to do it. Because you get something like 75.8%. So 63,000.
I don't know. Oh. Wait a second. the developer then gets the pref, or sorry, the 10% needs to go elsewhere, then you split, correct?
It has to be after the sale. Once they sell, you get that profit.
The sale's gonna be separate. Sale's gonna be separate.
10%, 60% of the left.
Because we take that 54,800.
Is it 60% of the 70,000? No.
That's what we're.
This has a left.
Okay, well, the 15,200, let's play around with it for a second. Okay,
It
15,200.
has to be adding the 10% of the NOI.
Well, the NOI, the NOI is 70,000.
No, the NOI is 100.
No, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, the before tax cash flow, I'm sorry. Yep. Now, this is, let's see where to put this. Is it potentially though 10% of the NOI, not before tax cash flow?
That's what I'm saying. The 10% of the NOI.
Could it be that?
Yeah.
That's what
Okay, let's try that. Okay. Could it be
That's 10,000.
so 10,000? Which would be 10% of net operating income instead of before tax cash flow. Okay? So if that's the case, does that work out for us?
It would be plus.
Still doesn't work
No, it would be plus, right?
out. Okay, let's do this. We're gonna send you a spreadsheet. Okay, grab your laptops.
Are you sending us a spreadsheet?
Yep, we're doing right now.
So this is not figure out what we give.
No, it is, but we're gonna play around here just a second.
plugins out, just use this.
Set it already?
Try to- There we go, okay. Should be in your email boxes.
Bless you.
That's, you only get two.
It's good.
Okay, it's pulling up.
Send 2 emails?
No, I sent one email. Oh, it's, okay. Okay, I guess I got impatient.
My mail won't even.
Is it pulling up though?
Oh, sweet, got 3 of these.
Okay, because I hit it 3 times. Why didn't you think it was sending?
You have different numbers, though. They're different.
Okay, well then type in these numbers. Oh, there's a. All right, you matching up with these numbers?
So the one you sent doesn't pull up.
Let's go to this. C14.
No? No.
What? Now it's making sense.
If we didn't email them all, we have to,
You need to put in those numbers.
we gotta put them all in.
Well, not all, just the ones that are highlighted in yellow.
Okay.
Those are the input cells.
Professor Sawyer, what's in the bottom? You said that, did you say anything?
I said it. I sent the email to you. So all you should have to do is just simply put in the numbers just that are on your sheet. The ones that are in gray on your sheet or yellow up here on the screen. You should match up.
C40.
Okay, so do what Noah is doing and sort of try to tear this apart.
You just sent the same spreadsheet on all of your emails?
Yes, I didn't think it was sending, and then apparently it sent like 3 times in a row, okay? All right, So let's just sort of take and see what it's doing here for this particular cell. C14, so let's go up and see what C14 is. C14 is our before tax cash flow, okay? Which in this case is $70,000. So it's starting with that. Okay, let's go back down. Then it's saying we're going to subtract out from that the combination of C40 times C34, okay? C40 is the 320,000.
Yeah, I'm having the same problem.
Okay, well you don't need, if it doesn't pull up, you can watch what I'm doing here on the board, okay? All right, 320,000, and then we're multiplying it by C34, which is the 10%. Okay. So they're only, this is the key, they're only getting the 10% based upon their proportional piece. Okay, we're going to get to that here in a second. Okay, so you subtract all of that out. That's the C40 times the C34. And then we're going to multiply all of that times C35. And C35 is the 60%. Okay, so let's just start with this math. 320,000 times the 10% is going to be what?
32.
Now you're seeing what we didn't do? Okay, so it's really not off of the before tax cash flow, it's off of their original investment. What sort of rate of return are we giving them off of their original investment of the 320,000? Okay, all right, so we subtract out the 32,000, so 70,000 minus 32,000 gives us 38,000 times 0.6.
Do that, can you please?
Okay,
Fred, can you do that calculation?
70 minus 32.
Yeah. 70 minus 32.
70 minus 32 times
Okay.
0.6. Okay, all right. Then we have C40 times, in this case, C40 is also the 320,000. Times 34. Okay, 40. So 22.8 plus 32 gives us the 54,800. Okay. So let's think about what's going on here. Why we're doing what we're doing. All right. So, excuse me. In this case, we are starting off with the total cash from the deal that's available for distribution is the 70,000. Everybody is clear on that? Yes? Okay. But here's where we went off the rails, because we were all thinking, oh, it's off of the 70,000 that we're calculating that 10% rate of return. No, the preferential return is based upon the equity investment. In this case, off of the 320,000. In other words, what we're saying here, there's the logic, and this is the part that we weren't going down the right path. The logic is we are putting in $320,000. That is our equity investment as the investor. We want to get 10% per year off of our equity investment. Okay? The amount that we put into the deal. Okay? So in that case, that's why we're going back and we're saying, what was our equity contribution? It was $320,000 times 10% of that, which gives us the $32,000. Then, what we're saying is, okay, we've also got to take into account 60% of whatever is sort of left over, if you will, is going to basically go to us as well. So that's where the 60% comes into play for the $22,800, and then we add back in the full 32 that we're going to get the 54.8. Now, for the developer piece of this, the developer is only going to get
The remaining up to the 70.
correct.
So, but it's, you can just plug in the 60 knowing that that'll be the remainder?
Yes.
Because that pushes the remainder.
Yes. Now, and this is a great illustration because we could have had the deal structure based on just strictly 10% of NOI. I should have put on here, I mean, I'm the one that came up with this example, but I should have put on here, in terms of that preferred return to the investor partner of 10%, I should have said preferred return based on equity contribution.
Yes.
Okay, as opposed to just simply preferred return to the investor partner, because there you're potentially making the assumption it's going to be based strictly off of the available operating cash flow. Okay, but that's my point. It could be either way.
Can you scroll up in the,
I'm trying to make sure I understand this accounting.
I just want to see the yellow cells you have.
$320,000 times 10%, and you take the 60% of that 32,000, add it to that 32,000, is 54,008. 54,008 is deducted from 70,000, the leftover goes to
They were going to say their part.
Yep. Okay. All right. Now, okay, so once you've done that, you're going to do basically similar sort of thing here for the operating cash flow and get the relative percentage for the 60% with regard to going to the investor for that. Once you've done that, then you're going to calculate the internal rates of return for each of these. Now, the thing that you're going to take note of is the total project is still getting the 23.74% rate of return, but the developer is actually getting a higher rate of return than the investor. And how is that happening?
Because of the proportion that they set up different before they split it, you know.
Well, it's the leftover part, because the developer only put in a relatively small piece of the original amount. They put in, what, 20%?
Yeah.
But here they're getting 40% of the leftovers, so that's kicking up their rate of return.
Fred, can we do the 15,200 calculations just like the way you did the?
Okay,
Hey, your
so let's take a look at this.
No. Because I have to update.
Punching the numbers, but I'm getting different numbers.
Right, the last numbers on the column, I'm sorry, row 45 on the year 5 last reversion.
Yep.
The numbers over here on the spreadsheet are missing a section of it. The formula's not right.
Yeah, the formula's
Everybody here is
not-
having the same problem.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not getting any of that, and it's already in.
You're not getting the 165?
No.
Okay.
Can you go up a little bit so we can kind of see that formula up there?
I don't know why our
Yeah,
formula's
your, the
different.
last piece of it
Okay.
is wrong, where it's multiplying it by 60% instead of 40, so you got C, C $36 on, okay, where he was a second ago.
Yep. Okay, let me do this real quick. All right, so what we've got, C14, let's start with that. C14 is what? C14 is before tax cash flow. Okay.
Pause.
Okay, and we're gonna subtract out C40 times C34, okay? So C40 is the 320,000. Times C34, which is the 10%.
Okay, 54. This side is-
Times C36. And C36 is the leftover distribution to the developer. Okay, so here, the math is simply gonna be, once again, this is gonna give us 32,000. So we take 70,000 minus 32,000 times the piece that the developer gets, which is 40%. So 70 minus 32,000 is 38,000 times 0.4, 15,400. Or 200, I'm sorry.
It's the bottom line that are all jacked up.
You said you were getting it.
I thought I wasn't actually, I'm getting developer column 22,800.
That's what I have.
Does anybody
Yeah,
else
we
get
have
that?
22.
Yeah, and that's just from,
Okay, so let's take a look at what I've got here for, all right, so let's take this.
And the DTIR is obviously expensive.
yeah.
All right, so let's take this one and sort of see what's happening here. So we've got C44, which in this case is, we're simply taking what is the year 4 amount of the 54,800, which would make sense, and we're adding that to C4 minus C3. So let's take a look at that.
See, that's the thing, your cell formula for that is.
Well, okay, let me, this is the correct one.
Oh,
So should we write this in there?
Yes, you should.
Okay.
All right. Apparently this must be an updated version of that. That must be an old version. Okay. All right, so C4 minus C3. So this is going to be 1.2 million minus 1 million. Okay. And then times C35, which is the leftover distribution to the investor, which is 60%. And then we're going to take all of that plus C3, which is going to be the million, times 1 minus C6, which is the loan to value ratio. Okay.
Huh?
And then times C10, which is the investor partner equity of 8. So let's do the math on that. Okay, so this would be 200,000 times 0.6. So this one, I'm just kind of, okay, start over again, 54,800. And then we're going to have, with that, 120,000 plus 1 million times 0.4 times 0.8, 320,000 plus 120 plus 54,800, 494,800. Matching? Yep. Okay. So all we're doing here is we're getting the capital gain and multiplying that by the 60%, and then taking the original loan amount, taking the equity piece of that, and multiplying it by the 80% that the investor will receive. Adding all that together.
Can you click on B45, please?
You don't actually have to, you would, I mean, you can go ahead and do the calculations I've got up there, but, or you just simply take the 670,000, subtract out the 494, 800, and it's gonna give you the 175, 200.
Hold on a second.
Just keep it on.
You can just email that to us.
There's the formula. Wait, instead of having to go through the email process all over again, you can just type that in real quick.
B45.
B45 is equal B44 plus, open parentheses, C4 minus C3, close parentheses, times C36, close parentheses, plus, open parentheses, C3 times, open parentheses, 1 minus C6, close parentheses, times C9, close parentheses.
What was the total?
175 to 200.
175, 200.
Your numbers are awesome.
There's a little bit bigger. That helps.
So I get to renew, you have to renew.
What did we get? 182. Did we change something on the top?
Can you go to B41?
Okay.
Because you have option. You have to choose.
Can you look back on B45 for a second?
Wait, no.
Did you get that number?
1 second.
Put it in. Yes. You got it. On the column B down at the bottom, is everybody getting like 22,800 along the
No,
cash flows?
You have to update that formula too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but
You have to make sure that it's connected to C36, the
Let's see.
1% alternate developer.
Can I see? Can you copy right now?
yeah.
You have to make sure it's.
I'm doing this
it's actually
right now,
defined by 40%.
trying to get it.
Yeah.
No,
Check
but
your junk mail.
But the previous one.
Check your junk
so
mail.
there had to be run all the way down where they were working a lot.
Just send us the updated one.
I'm just sending you the update. This time I'm only gonna try to send it once. Okay. It says it's sent. Okay, you should have the new version of it, so just pull up the new version, you'll be fine. Sorry about that, I didn't realize I made an adjustment to it.
I bet you're coming to now. Oh, here we go. Back in business.
So,